So in this video, I want to talk about the 3DS since recently I have been revisiting the 3DS. So let's talk about the 3DS and why I love the 3DS as much as I love the 3DS. So when it comes to video game consoles and when it comes to handhelds specifically, I must admit at this very moment, I think the 3DS would definitely be in my top 5 or even in my top 3 favorite handhelds of all time when it comes to video game consoles. I just love everything about the console. I love the games on it particularly. I just love everything about it, and honestly, it's one of the coolest systems you can ever own if you love video games, and I have one right here, and the model that I currently have for the 3DS is actually the new 3DS XL. I did actually upgrade to the new 3DS XL when it first came out, and this is the one that came out back in 2015 when they did a revision of the 3DS line. And honestly, when it comes to this system, I must say it was okay for a revision, but it wasn't nothing mind-blowing, and it really, in my opinion, really wasn't worth picking up. Sure, of course, there were some benefits to this system, like for instance, you did get better 3D tracking for the 3D, so the 3D was stable compared to the other systems, which didn't have good gyroscopic 3D because it wasn't stable. So for instance, if you moved your head around a lot, or if you moved the system around a lot, then you were pretty much screwed when it comes to looking at the 3D because it would get really blurry. But in here, it doesn't really get blurry. But outside of that, I don't really know what the benefits of owning this system are. Sure, there's more buttons on this system. It has a slightly faster processor than the other systems in the lineup when it comes to the 3DS line of systems, but for me personally, I don't really think the experience is miles better than what you would get with some of the older 3DSs, like the original 3DS XL, or even the original 3DS model, or the original 2DS model. That's just me, but the improvements they made to the system were pretty cool, and there are some games that actually are specific to the new 3DS XL and can only be played on the new 3DS XL, but there's only like 2 games as far as I'm aware, and the 2 games that only play on the new 3DS XL aren't even that amazing, or they're not games you probably don't even want to consider to pick up this system just for those games alone anyway. One of them definitely has to be, I think, Xenoblade Chronicles. Xenoblade Chronicles, the original one back on the Wii, is only playable if you have a new system. So if you have a new 3DS or a new 2DS, you can play it on that hardware. But outside of that, there's only one other game, and I can't remember the name of the game. So yeah, there wasn't really many reasons to upgrade to this system, even though, like I said before, this does have more buttons than the original model. A lot of games really didn't use the buttons on this to full advantage, which does kind of suck. There are games out there, don't get me wrong, like for instance, 2 of the games I can think of off the top of my head that really do utilize having more buttons on the 3DS are going to be Super Smash Brothers. Super Smash Brothers 3DS does utilize pretty much every single button on the actual 3DS, including the brand new C-Stick, which is pretty cool since that game, you know, you can do smash attacks, and smash attacks are going to be very useful on a secondary stick compared to not having a secondary stick. And then the other one was one of the Resident Evil games, or maybe all of the Resident Evil games. I do own one Resident Evil game, and that Resident Evil game particularly, I think Revelations 1 I have, at least that one I do know does support the extra C-Stick, so that's cool. So as you're moving around, you can pretty much use the C-Stick to control the camera like most video game. Most first-person or third-person shooters, you know, you have the second analog stick to control the camera, and the first stick is to also control the movement of your character. So that's very cool. But besides that, I don't really know what this revision, who this revision was for, what Nintendo was really thinking when it comes to this revision. One game that really does take advantage of this processor as well definitely does have to be Super Smash Brothers 3DS again, because that game is one game that really suffered on older 3DSs. What I mean by that is it's one game that just took way too long to load. So by having a brand new 3DS or new 2DS, you do get the benefits of the game loading faster and everything just being a much more better experience when it comes to loading time. So there's that. And going back to the system really quickly, this video, I'm pretty much just jumping all over the place, talking about models, talking about games I love, just talking about everything 3DS related. But going back to the games, I like a lot of different games on this system. There's plenty of games on this system. I think at this very moment, there's over 400 games for this system. So no matter what type of gamer you are, I'm pretty sure you can find a genre or a game that you're definitely going to love when it comes to the 3DS. The 3DS is definitely home to some of my favorite games of all time. Like for instance, one game I dearly love is Mario Kart 7. Honestly, if you were to ask me any day of the week what is one of my favorite Mario Kart games, it's definitely Mario Kart 7. And Mario Kart 7 for me personally, I've had so many memories with Mario Kart 7. I love everything about that game. I love it more than a lot of Mario Karts. I may even love that game more than Mario Kart 8. Go figure. Yes, that's just me, but I love everything about that game, and that game was one of my favorite games, and that game did the online perfect in that game, and overall I just love everything about Mario Kart 7. And then of course some of the hard hitters, of course we got 3D Land, and I love 3D Land. I think 3D Land is a very simple and sweet and short 3D platformer if you're into 3D platformers with Mario, of course. And then this system is known for a lot of good RPGs, so if you're an RPG fan, then you're definitely going to love the 3DS. Of course, the one franchise I do have to mention right off the bat, because I'm a big fan of, and that's why I think this would definitely be one of my top 3 favorite handhelds of all time, is for the Fire Emblem franchise. I'm a huge Fire Emblem person, and I love Fire Emblem to death. Honestly, like I said in a prior video, I already talked about Fire Emblem a lot. I must say it's definitely my top 20 favorite franchises of all time when it comes to video games. I love everything about Fire Emblem, and the 3DS is home to a lot of different Fire Emblem games. I think we got 3 or 4 or 5 Fire Emblem games on this, so we do have a lot of Fire Emblem love when it comes to the 3DS. And then there's other RPGs on this system, and then we got a whole bunch of other games on this system, but overall this system is definitely my favorite, one of my favorite Nintendo systems, or one of my favorite handhelds of all times for so many reasons. Now let's actually talk about the gyroscopic 3D, because that was the big thing with the 3DS and Nintendo. They kept touting on this plan to make a system that had gyroscopic 3D, kind of like what you would see in 3D TVs or 3D movies and things like that. What do I think about that overall? Overall, the time I've had this system and today, I really don't go out of my way to use the 3D all too much. I must admit it. I know there's still people out there that do generally love the 3D effect, and I will admit for a lot of games the 3D effect is nice, but I use it once in a blue moon, or I use it once in a while. I don't use it enough to really say that I'm a hard time user of the 3D effect when it comes to the 3DS. But what I can say is the 3D effect is really good on the 3DS, and you can actually tell that stuff is popping out at your eyes when it comes to the 3D effect of the 3DS. The only thing about the 3D with it is the fact that it does drain the battery significantly when you're actually playing the 3DS and you're actually using it. That's also another reason why I never actually wanted to use the 3D, because it does drain the battery much more faster if you're playing in 2D mode, so that's why I normally don't do it. And not every game actually utilizes 3D in the same way, so some games may look better in 3D, but other games may not look better in 3D, if that makes sense. And even the games that look super good in 3D with the 3D gyroscopic effect, I must admit, there's no game out there that makes me want to play in 3D full time. It's kind of like icing on the cake, or it's kind of like condiments. You use condiments to supplement your food, but they're just there to supplement your food. You can go without condiments, but you choose to use them, kind of like the 3D, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people agree on that, and I think even Nintendo agrees on that to some extent. You can see they made the 2DS line. They made the original 2DS and the new 2DS without the 3D effect, so there's that when it comes to that. But the 3D is fun, and I will admit I do like using it from time to time again, and I am glad, I guess, Nintendo did try something a little bit different and a little bit wacky, but it's not really too surprising since we're talking about a company here who really does love doing all these little really weird wacky systems. They're known to making the Wii, the Wii U, the DS, of course, so of course they're known to making all these weird systems. So the 3D was there, and it was something, and it was cool. They tried their foot in something a little bit different. Now let's actually talk about which model of the 3DS should you actually buy if you're going to buy the 3DS. And again, this question always comes up for a lot of people. Should you still buy the 3DS? 100%. If you're a Nintendo Switch owner, you should still buy the 3DS, because I think the 3DS is fun, and even though it is kind of hard to go back to, I will admit, for a lot of people, and even for me sometimes, depending on what the game is, it is hard to go back to this system, because I will admit the Nintendo Switch is a system that does have very good graphics, especially in portable mode. I think you're talking about 720p HD graphics, whereas this thing is not even HD graphics. It's a little bit under HD graphics, but overall, I still think this is still worth picking up anytime, any year, no matter what time it is. This thing is definitely worth picking up. And honestly, which model should you pick? Honestly, the obvious answer would be pick up any model of the 3DS. It doesn't matter as long as you're playing 3DS games, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I pretty much know every model or every variant of the 3DS. Honestly, if you were to buy a 3DS in 2019, 2020, 2021, or in the future, I would definitely probably say stay away from the original 3DS model. While the original 3DS model is a good model to actually buy, I would say that one probably aged the worst, and I know a lot of people didn't like the design of that one, and on top of that, I've heard that sometimes the screens on that one, but just by closing it, can scratch slightly, and obviously the batteries in those aren't probably that good, and probably they have the most wear out of any 3DS model. So honestly, I would stay away from that one unless you want a super good deal, because I'm assuming those ones are probably some of the cheapest ones you can buy because they're super old, and a lot of people probably don't even use the original 3DS model anymore. So if you wanted to get into 3DS collecting or play 3DS games, that model would be a good candidate to consider, just because, like I said, it would be cheap to own or cheap to buy if you wanted to buy that, most likely. But for most people, honestly, it comes down to the new 3DS XL, the new 2DS XL, or the original 2DS model. And out of those three, honestly, I would probably say, even though this is the new 3DS XL and it does have the 3D effect, honestly, I think for a lot of people, they'll be much more better if they just go ahead and buy the new 2DS XL, because it shares everything the new 3DS XL has, just minus the gyroscopic 3D. And I think that's a very good stepping stone for a lot of people, because it only sits at I think $150. On top of that, it is going to be much more lighter than this system, and you do have to take in consideration how much you're going to be taking this around with you, depending on what type of person you are. And if you're a person that you think you're going to be taking this outside of the house, or taking this with you on road trips or things like that, and putting it in your book bag, you want everything to weigh as little as possible, and that one does weigh significantly lesser than the new 3DS XL. And like I said, it has all the features, and like I said before, you can do everything this pretty much does. You can play those two exclusive games, and then you can also get the better processor. And on top of that, I didn't even mention this as well, the new line of systems, the new 3DS XL and the new 2DS XL can also play Super Nintendo games, which the other ones cannot play. And so you do have to have a new 3DS or new 2DS to take advantage of Super Nintendo games, which is also a benefit of having these systems. And that harkens back to why I love the 3DS. Again, why I love it so much is the fact that, well, it was the first handheld from Nintendo to actually support Virtual Console, so you can play retro games. Is the lineup robust? I must admit, it's not that robust if you compare it to something like the Wii or even the Wii U. That has much more better catalog of virtual console games. But what I can say is this thing definitely does have a better virtual console than the actual Nintendo Switch. That's the current gen system from Nintendo, which is kind of odd since that thing only supports NES games if you subscribe to the Nintendo Switch online service. So that's very odd. But if you want to play some old retro games, then this is definitely a system to pick up as well. But boiling it down, like I said before, if you're interested in buying a system, definitely the new 2DS XL over this one, in my opinion, unless you gotta have the gyroscopic 3D, but it just doesn't add that much, and it's just like icing on the cake, the 3D gyroscope effect. Well, I just don't think it's worth it to buy this one specifically, and you'll be spending a little bit more money. And if you don't want that at all, and you don't want this design, the clamshell design where the system opens and closes, you can go with the 2DS. And I know a lot of people love the original 2DS because it's just a flat design. It doesn't have that of a hinge. You don't have to worry about what if the hinge breaks or whatnot. But then again, on that model, you do have to worry about what if the screens gets damaged, because those screens are unprotected. You can flop on a screen protector on those, of course, but even so, those things are going to be unprotected. And maybe the actual form factor could actually be slightly bigger than this one, just because, well, it's a little bit longer since it doesn't actually close. But there's that, and that one is still a good model to consider, because like I said, a lot of people think that one is just super comfortable to use in the hands and things like that. And the nice thing about the new line of Nintendo systems, the new 2DS and the new 3DS, is the fact that they also got better battery life than something like your 2DS or something like your original 3DS XL or the original 3DS model. So if you wanted something with slightly better battery life, these are going to be the systems to buy. One thing you may or may not even be aware of at this very moment when it comes to the 3DS line of systems is Nintendo actually has a problem when it comes to manufacturing these things. The quality control is very inconsistent. I'm going to talk about this really quickly. Now, like I said, you may not be aware of this, but basically what's going on with Nintendo and the 3DS line of systems, every time they produce this, of course, you guys know the Nintendo 3DS line of systems has 2 screens, dual screens, and the problem is there's quality control going on because basically what's happening is both screens aren't the same quality. So for instance, you may actually get a screen that looks very nice, but if you tilt it slightly, you can see that there is going to be a screen that could be washed out. And basically when you buy a 3DS brand new or even buy a 3DS used, you never know what type of screens you are going to get. You don't really want the screens that when you tilt the system, they are going to look washed out, but then again, you can't really pick what 3DS you are going to get. I guess again, you can look around for a used one and things like that. I wasn't even aware of this until I actually got mine about 3 years later, and I was like, well, it's too late to go back. And honestly, it doesn't really bother me, but I know there's people who are paranoid, have OCD, or want the best of the best. And if you do want the best of the best, all you have to do is open up your 3DS and then tilt it slightly, and then you can definitely see that one's going to be washed out and one's not going to be washed out. If the screens look both the same, then you'll know you have good screens. But if you look and one's a little bit washed out and one's not washed out, you know that you've got a weird 3DS from Nintendo. Just make sure when you tilt it, if any of the screens look washed out and they look like it's hard to see them from an angle, that means you've got the bad screens, and that's very weird from Nintendo, coming from a company that's known to make quality products. Why would they make a product that's kind of inconsistent when it comes to actually releasing this? So basically, you're taking a gamble when you buy 3DS systems because they were all made slightly different when it comes to the screens and whatnot. Now, talking about backwards compatibility, moving on to that, I didn't mention that the 3DS is backwards compatible with the DS line of systems. What do I actually think of backwards compatibility as a whole? As a whole, I think, again, it's just icing on the cake. It's great that these systems do have backwards compatibility. Am I going to lose sleep at night if systems don't have backwards compatibility like the Nintendo Switch or other systems? No. For me, personally, I can always go back to the original hardware. But what I will say is it is always nice to have backwards compatibility so you don't have to worry about flopping out an original DS model to play DS games and then flop out a 3DS to play 3DS games. You can have it in one package like this. So it is very nice. At least this does have backwards compatibility if you want to play DS games. And the compatibility is spot on because it's not really emulation. It's pretty much like you'd be playing on the original hardware. So if you're considering thinking of picking up an original DS model, you may want to consider a 3DS system of some sorts just to get that backwards compatibility. And even if you don't want to play 3DS games, it's most likely, I don't know why you wouldn't want to play 3DS games. I mean, come on, 3DS games are awesome. You have that advantage as well. But then again, I can see someone wanting to own the original hardware for a lot of different reasons. Maybe for nostalgic purposes, or maybe for the fact that the hardware is going to be cheaper when you buy older hardware, like DS hardware compared to 3DS hardware is going to be cheaper most likely. I think you can get like DS Lites or DSIs like $40, $50 compared to what you can buy any of the 3DS models, since it's still fairly new and the 3DS does hold its value right now. So there's that. But overall, like I said, I'm very happy with this system. I don't regret playing this system. I put a lot of hours into this system. Overall, I like this system. I like the games on this system, and I'm very glad I have a 3DS of some sorts. And honestly, I don't think I'm ever going to be selling this anytime soon because this is my baby and I love everything about this. The one thing I do have to say about Nintendo and the 3DS really quickly, I must admit, Nintendo does have this problem over here in the States. I don't ever know why Nintendo never released the new 3DS, the small version, not the new 3DS XL, because obviously right here, this is the new 3DS XL. I don't know why they did not release the new 3DS small version. I do know for a factor a couple of times they did it on holidays. Like for instance, we did get one, I think, with 3D Land over here in the West. Correct me if I'm wrong. I definitely know we did get Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer, and Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer did come with the new 3DS, not the new 3DS XL, so that's very nice there. But it's, for some reason, at least here in the States, it's very hard to get your hands on a new 3DS. Yeah, new 3DS, the small version, not the XL version, and for some reason, I really want that system just because, well, I think I'm actually starting to take my 3DS around with me pretty much everywhere I go. Not to say this is the biggest system in the world, but not to say it's the smallest system in the world. And if I can get something slightly smaller, then I would definitely go that route. But it's just too hard to find the new 3DS, and I don't really want to buy an original 3DS model because the original 3DS model is probably aging really badly. A lot of those are beat up and whatnot, and I just think that the quality control of the new 3DS line is going to be slightly better than the original 3DS. I guess if I have no choice, I'll buy an original 3DS model, but most likely a lot of those are probably beat up at this point, and there's not too many good ones around, and they're probably not the best quality, so that's why I'm trying to find that. But at least I must admit, this is definitely smaller than a Nintendo Switch. That's always been my problem with the Nintendo Switch. I must admit, it's a flat-out amazing system. I've got my money's worth. I love almost everything about the Switch. I love all the games on the Switch, but the Nintendo Switch is just too big for my pockets, of course, and then it's just a little bit too inconvenient to bring the Switch around, which, when you know, a lot of people nowadays have to bring a cell phone with them, and since you have to bring a cell phone with you anyway, in the first place for emergencies, or just have a smartphone on you or a cell phone in most cases, then you have to worry about your Nintendo Switch. It's kind of a nuisance. It's just a little bit too big. Of course, at least Nintendo is addressing this with the new the Nintendo Switch Lite, so that's very good news on Nintendo's part. But even so, the Nintendo Switch Lite is not really pocketable. It's still a little bit too big, but I understand why the Switch is as big as it is, because they wanted you to really get that console-like experience on the go, since the quality of the games are much more better than what you would get on a 3DS in terms of graphics, in terms of these worlds and things like that. You're technically playing real console games you would play on an actual home console on the go, and they probably wanted as big a screen as possible, so you're really immersed in the experience. But for me, it's just a little bit too big. That's also why I love